for you to view if you're able to view that autopsy while it's being carried out. Child abuse cases are some of the most difficult ones to look at, but you need to know what goes into that. You need to know what that bruising looks like and when it's significant that you have broken ribs or squeezed ribs. In some cases where they are allowing procurement to take place on child abuse bodies, you want to make sure you're looking at the before photograph because those things actually change over time. Bruises will become darker. And so if you're defending someone, you want to see, well, what's the original photograph? So if they're actually allowing procurement, you want to ask for the original photographs because the other photographs may be shown in the jury and they appear just much darker and larger, and that's from the time that has taken place while they are getting procurement. Battery or blunt trauma, those are cases where someone's beaten up. And again, it's important to maybe get an idea of what those injuries look like. Yes?
I'm sorry, what is procurement? Is that when you give a body?
Procurement is when they take tissue.
Okay.
They procure the tissue or organs. So sometimes you have a person who is almost dead, not quite dead, and that's when you have organs taken. Because you can't take organs from a dead body and have to put them into another body. You can take tissue. So a lot of times someone who has like maybe they're shot in the chest or they're shot in the head, they will be able to be procured, or the old term was harvested.
Oh.
You actually have to be in a hospital setting and be on life support in order to be an organ donor. So we've had cases here in Houston, people commit suicide in the hospital parking lot without knowing if they're not in the hospital, they can't get the organs. And if you're already dead, the organs are dead too. Then tissue is procured. Generally, tissue is procured after autopsy, but if it's heart tissue, it's going to be procured usually prior or during autopsy. So it's fresher.
So this procurement takes place before the autopsy?
Generally, yes. Yes. I actually can say many years ago, I think I sued a couple of places here. We had a big snafu about, it was the old medical examiner coroner law where the organ procurement people could take the heart valves and the corneas without getting permission from families. And so it ended up being a national class action lawsuit against Michigan and Ohio because they passed this law with coroners, medical examiners not even being involved, and so they were just taking it. And actually during my 10-year in Washington, D.C., they passed a law in the District of Columbia that allowed the organ procurement agency there to inject a chemical into cardiac death patients who weren't brain dead, but their heart wasn't working, and they injected this chemical that preserved the kidneys. And I said, what's going to happen is someone's going to come up here with a rifle or a shotgun and blast you all because you shouldn't be touching the body. And I would say, shortly after I left DC, that program failed, famously, because that's what happens. But procurement has to take place for organs prior to autopsy. And that's when actually they'll try to get the medical examiner to go into the hospital and look at the body and give the okay. Any other questions? This was the one sheet that people do forget to ask about. And this is the who's at the autopsy sheet, who's present. This is something that every office should have a record of. It tells you if police officers are there, if they were really there, and also if you have students or residents there. Sometimes you allow a student or resident to do something to the body. They shouldn't on homicides, but just in case, you can always pull up and say, well, you were a resident 2 years ago, what did you see? Sometimes things disappear, or sometimes you have a prosecutor drops by. Who's at the autopsy? And this is actually me as a Getty print. This is actually the old Harris County Medical Examiner's Office and me wearing my magenta scrubs, holding up a body there. I don't know how that photograph got into the public, but there you go, wearing my PPD. So, I have time for questions.
I have a question. What would you say is the greatest challenge of evaluating an autopsy off paper instead of actually seeing it occur?
You really need to have expertise in evaluating a written autopsy. And generally that is reserved for a chief, someone who has experience in doing that. I can read an autopsy and tell you what someone didn't do by what's written there, but everyone can't. but that was my training. So that's why you want to make sure the person you're dealing with has that expertise. There's a certain way you should follow it. There is now a standard, and you'll see a standard autopsy report on the website of NAME, the National Association of Medical Examiners. They'll have a standard approach, but there are things that should go on, and I'll give you a good example. The Freddie Gray case in Baltimore, which has been on the news and not quite resolved yet, they talked about a high-level injury to the neck, but they do not describe the cervical spine. So that's saying, did you describe the spinal cord? Did you describe the spine? What level is this injury at? They gloss over that. So things like that, telling me, okay, so you didn't do a posterior dissection all the way down to the level of the vertebral column and open it up. And you didn't describe blood in that channel and so on and so forth. So it does take someone who has expertise and knowing what should be done if you're going to be very thorough and seeing that it's not written about.
Thank you.
I guess it's similar on shaken baby cases, because those are just hard because you can't do experiments on babies. So,
Or anybody.
yeah. So I guess this is more of a general question, just on shaken babies in general. Do you find it's just really hard to just make a determination as shaken baby syndrome?
Well, first of all, we don't make the determination. We don't use those
Right.
words at all.
Right.
Okay? It is usually a closed head injury and
Mhm.
closed head injury with impact.
Right.
Actually, the case I showed you early on with the kind of
Mhm.
impact, that was a person that hit their child against the crib.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do a good autopsy, generally what you have with the closed head injury is no external findings. And so we had, up until I guess the early 90s, we had a lot of kids going to the grave with no diagnosis. So if you do a complete autopsy, you generally have a subdural hematoma. You generally have bleeding into the retina of the eye. So when you have a case like that of suspicion, you should actually have the eyes taken out, reserved, fixed, and then sliced. And then you're looking for retinal hemorrhages. Also, you generally have retinal hemorrhage, you'll have hemorrhage along the optic nerve. Okay, so you have to look for that. You also have to carefully dissect what we call fillet, the posterior portion of the shoulders and the arms, but then you'll have grab marks.
Right.
But you have to be very careful in how you do that examination. It really should be layer by layer with photographs taken all the way with anterior and posterior dissections or photographed layer by layer. Also, you really have very careful weights done. So this is where you have to figure out if they're actually monitoring if their scales are on level every day, and that you have the right weight, and they're also there using the proper scale to measure the circumference of the head. And that's where you want to have those photographs that do a 360 of the head that show if you have any separation of the sutures, because you can just have brain swelling. But generally with closed head trauma, you have the brain swelling, you have the subdural, you have retinal hemorrhages.
Right, the bilateral.
Well, bilateral or a unilateral, because you can have one side of the brain swell and compress the other side. So you want to have good photographs of that brain. And this is a problem when you have procurement on infants, because that can change over time. You may not see the swelling, and the brain may be very soft by the time the child gets off of the ventilator, or if they have done procurement, that brain just begins to degenerate and you don't see those changes. You also, it'd be nice if they would have the CAT scan to show that you do have that swelling. Because the ultimate cause of death is compression of the central nervous system and your ability to breathe.
And even harder if the child is still alive. So.
Yes, yes, and then that's where, again, you want to make sure that your neurosurgeon or neurologist has good CAT scans and is reading them correctly. But generally, there is nothing on the outside of the body, and that's why you have to do the complete autopsy.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I understand that a forensic pathologist can't make a determination, but is there telltale signs for certain injuries that you can look at and say, well, I'm not going to say it was this, but it really does look like it. So like in a shaken baby case, it might be like, you said the swelling of the brain. So if you see that, you say, okay, that's probably shaken baby. It won't say it, but it probably is. Or like there's blood in the kidney, so that probably means this.
Generally, we use the term consistent with, and then we should be able to tell you why it is consistent with, okay?
Well, I guess
Because
one of the most common, I'm just curious, common homicides of consistent things you can see that probably makes sense. Is there such thing as that?
Yes, and that's why you say them, and that's why you want someone who is experienced and is a good communicator. Seeing this swollen brain, okay? And generally, you want to have a really good photograph of the inferior surface of the brain to see if you had any compression with the basilar skull. You need to have that photograph taken. You need to be able to look at your studies from the hospital setting. And certainly if they've had an intracranial pressure monitor, you want to have all that data. And you also, with a child, we always try to get the medical history of the child. If you have a child that's under 2 years old, they should have serial repetitive examinations that are measuring their head circumference. Because we do have data that says what the average child should look like and have developed to. So they should be able to answer that for you, get you into that ballpark. Now, if you don't have hard evidence, again, when you have blood and you have no reason for that, and you are still ruling out natural disease, usually we say that we have brain swelling. We have a little bit of blood in the paraspinal muscles of the back, so again, you can have that whiplash. And then we may have some tearing of the inferior portion of the brain that goes along with that. So they should be able to list something there that tells you. If they can't, then it's not. Yes.
I have two questions.
Okay.
The simple, easier one is probably going to be the one where you use the diagrams for. Did you see the armed forces? I've looked up some of those diagrams before, but they're not that easy to find. Did you cite a place where we can find them?
If you go to the Armed Forces Medical Examiner,
Okay.
okay, they have their own website, and they actually have a section that has diagrams, and they're open to the public.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you find most of the diagrams used across this country came from the AFNE.
Okay. And the second question is, would a forensic pathologist be the person to ask if there are, you have a case where there's a stabbing with serrated knife, you know what the murder weapon is, serrated knife, in the anterior part of the chest area, and a nick to, like, let's say a vital organ like the heart. If all of that has been shown in the autopsy, would a forensic pathologist be able to determine or say either way as far as the absence or the presence of blood at the scene where this occurred? Like, for example, if there was 2 stab wounds, this is very generically speaking, would a forensic pathologist be able to say there should be, so many milliliters of blood or some blood or a drop, as opposed to there's nothing there, as to that's where the stabbing occurred? Would you be able, I know it's kind of a difficult question, but it's just something that...
Well, you said a couple things there.
Yeah.
First of all, you said serrated knife.
Yes.
You cannot tell serrated knife stab wound unless it is dragged across the body surface.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
You can never tell that.
Okay.
And sometimes we'll show board questions when you see a pattern that is repetitive and is on the outside of the wound. And the one thing with stab wounds, the body will seal itself. So you actually have a lot less blood at the scene as someone that has a very quick in and out stab wound. It's going to continue to do damage inside, and if they're running, talking, or active, they're going to have very limited blood at the scene.
Okay.
Because it's a sharp, neatly divided defect versus a gunshot wound ripping the tissue apart and blasting the vessels, or blunt trauma that is going to damage the vessels. Oftentimes, stab wounds seal themselves. Okay? And then what the forensic pathologist tries to do, if you see a pattern in the cartilage or bone, you keep that segment. You can actually do x-ray dispersion to see if you have metal fragments within that. That's a very costly, but we're at that point now of trying to establish guilt or innocence. You might have a little flecks of metal left on that bone or left on that cartilage, and also that's the only way to really give you the best shape of that instrument is through bone or cartilage. The tissue will stretch, the skin will stretch, but generally you try to keep a fragment of that bone or a fragment of that cartilage that surrounds it to give you your best shape of that. And the forensic pathologist is supposed to be able to give you the dimensions of that wound and the depth of that wound, and try to reapproximate by either putting clear tape over the external portion and measuring that size of it. And bear in mind that generally autopsies are done the next day after the body comes in, so those wound appearances can change. They'll dry or darken, sometimes the wound just will roll up. But it's not uncommon to have very, very limited blood when you have a single stab wound. But if you have multiple stab wounds and someone's doing this, then you have cast off, and you have blood going behind.
So like, let's say for example, there was a situation where something supposedly occurred and there's 2 stab wounds that are 3 to 4 inches in depth, right?
Mhm.
Inch and a half.
Blade.
That you called how long the stab wound was, but depth. An inch and a half is about how long or wide
Inch
the
and a
blade
half,
would be.
okay, blading.
And then somebody runs 90 feet away and there's no presence of blood. Would a forensic pathologist be able to say if that's something plausible, or can you give an opinion
Yes.
on that?
It is, and for the very same reasons, because again, the body can seal, and that blood and damage continues to go on, but typically they're active, and that's happened quite a bit. Person's running to get away, and boom, they fall out, and then you have all the blood is contained in the body, because there's no place for it to go.
But you would expect to find blood splatter if it was more than,
If you have multiple stab wounds to the body, and the person is doing this, you're gonna have cast off generally. But somebody can have one in and out, and they think they're okay, and the next thing you know, you open the body up, and there's like 500 cc's of blood that's around the heart, and the person couldn't breathe, and the heart could beat.
thank you.
Have you toured the new facilities here in Harris County?
I haven't, they were just getting settled, and I had lunch with Dr. Sanchez, so I haven't told him yet.
Okay. Wondering what you thought of it.
Well, I tell you one thing, it's getting really big. And you to the point where we're just separation of crime lab and ME office, so that's something you're gonna have to look at down the line when you're doing so much. And, I can tell you, when we're doing the O.J. Simpson